Custard.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay. I'm glad we clarified that and made me look like an idiot.
Yeah.
All right.
That's my job.
So here's the story is that General Custer, he and all of his men in 1876, July 25 specifically, they went into Indian territory, and we'll get into the backstory of this, but they were killed by the American Indians, and we've had this conversation before. If you read it on the internet, some American Indians say, it's American Indian, and some say, just call me Indian, I don't care. So I'm going to use it interchangeably.
Sounds good.
Devin's giving me a dirty look for that.
Why?
I'm just thinking I think it should be Native American, but...
Indian's
well, but
good.
that's the thing is that I've seen all over, there's no consensus. Some people are like, I want to be Native America. Some people are like, I'm an Indian.
Yeah.
I mean, so I don't want to prescribe to one because
it's not.
it's a split opinion.
Yeah, it's not like it's a racial slur or anything like that. And it's
okay.
I mean, essentially, Columbus went looking for India and Indians, and he found some. So there you go.
Okay, so let's start this portion of the episode over so that this doesn't make no sense to anybody. As people, as we've kind of said so far, people, at least in North America, will know this is referred to as Custer's Last Stand. And what happened is that Custer and all of his men were defeated and killed by the Lakota Sioux, the Dakota Sioux, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho tribes that were camped by the river. This is the Little Bighorn River on June 25th, 1876. Now, Custer himself commanded approximately 200 men when he went into battle, and officially none of those 200 survived. But since almost immediately after Custer and his men were resoundingly defeated and killed, people have come forward and said they were there and they made it, in some way, they made it out alive.
It's
I
kind
was
of
there.
it's kind of like the people who say they knew D.B. Cooper, but unfortunately he just died 6 months ago. But hey, I wrote a book about it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's tons of, there's like 120 people over the years have come forward and said they were there.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of these people, and one of those people specifically, which is the focus of today's episode, is a man named Frank Finkel, who in 1920 announced that he had been part of the group that went into that territory with Custer specifically, and he managed to make it out alive. So that's our mystery, is Frank Finkel telling the truth?
Okay.
And was he among those 200 men?
So it's who finked on Frank Finkel.
Or is it?
Not quite.
No, that doesn't work, because is it Finkel's thinking? Or,
Yeah.
No.
Well,
Joe,
did Finkel think on himself?
Yeah.
in a sense,
It's Finkel
it could
thinking.
Because Finkel
What
thinking.
were you thinking?
Okay, sorry.
Because it could be construed as desertion in the face of the enemy. So, according to his story, he didn't actually desert. But
No, that's very true.
And yeah, we're gonna
although
get
he
into
sort of
that,
kind
right?
of did.
Well, but we'll get into repercussions of that and the positives and negatives and all of that. So listen, this is a historical mystery. So there's a bunch of history that I have to try and lay out for everybody
But
listening.
only in 3 sentences, so it'll
Well,
be
but that's the
merciful.
difficulty. Is there's so much here. I'm going to do my best to keep this as condensed as possible, but that means, of course, that I'm going to have to omit and simplify some information. So if you are an aficionado of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, please understand that's what's going on here.
Rest assured, Steve knows.
Yeah, because listen, we did the whole football thing, and football nerds are nowhere near as mean as history nerds.
Oh, yeah.
So
They get
this could get
picky.
really dirty, but just understand, we know that we're trimming it down because that's not the main point of the story.
Right.
Yep,
Okay.
Yep.
So here's where we go. Before the Battle of the Little Bighorn, of course, when Europeans came to North America, they immediately began pushing around the native people, the indigenous people.
Well, I wouldn't say immediately, just eventually.
Pretty
they got
damn
around
quick,
to it.
but
Yeah.
they started pushing them around for things that they wanted, and that ended up meaning that they pushed them off of their ancestral homes, and through the reservation system, they began relocating them to other places that they were not previously living upon.
Yeah, but that again, it didn't happen. That took centuries before that actually happened.
And this is simplifying as much as possible, because we're not going to get into the ethics of why that happened. And
I'm not saying it was fair. No,
through the lens of history,
before
probably was a bad thing, not the best thing to do.
Definitely a bad thing, yeah.
So we move forward, and I mean, if you want to get in sense, like, I don't know if you two had a chance to do this, but I did some reading on things like the Trail of Tears, which is very famous, and if you do reading on that, you get a real sense of what it was like for the Native Americans to go through that.
Yeah,
so
they're really awful stuff.
Yeah, really bad. Okay. So then what we do is, as we move forward through time, there becomes notable names, and names that you may have heard before, such as Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse.
They are some of the famous ones.
They are some of the famous ones, and at least Sitting Bull will play a major role in our story. Crazy Horse was there apparently as well, but these guys were both leaders of the Sioux, and the Sioux lived in the Great Plains. If people don't know what the Great Plains is, it's essentially
it's a big flat spot in the middle of the
the center of the North America, north to south. It's really kind of a giant flat spot.
It's great big. That's why they call it the Great Plains.
It's the flyover states.
It is.
All of them.
Yeah.
So these guys in roughly the mid 1800s, they began speaking out against the U.S. government. And the government, of course, is at this point, as I've said before, they're pushing people around, they're pushing them out. The other thing they're doing is they're breaking treaties, and that's going to play into this story very strongly.
Yes.
That's where the term Indian giver comes from.
Yes,
actually,
because you give and then you take it back.
You give and you change your mind, you take it back.
Actually, I'm weird about that derogatory term, is that it's based on white people.
Yeah.
Well, that's
but
the thing.
It makes a negative connotation.
Well, no, I mean, it's not like, since I was a kid, it was understood as not something derogatory towards the Indians. I mean, some people today, misconstruing the history of that phrase, think I've claimed it's a slur against the Indians. It never has been. It's not.
That's my point, though, is that for people who don't know the history, it becomes a slur.
Yeah, some people now think that it
slurs.
is, and it's not.
Yeah, but it is. It's actually a negative thing towards us white folk.
Or at least Americans.
Yeah, so here's what happens, though, is that the Native Americans are pushed into a reservation. This is in South Dakota. And then in 1875, gold is found in the Black Hills of South Dakota.
And which the Indians had no use for, so hey, let's kick them off their land,
the U.S. government
going,
what the hell? Like, these Indians are not harvesting it, they're just living on that ground. That's dumb.
Just respecting the earth or whatever.
That's right, so we might as well push them off, find them a new home.
And that's exactly what happens, is they say, wait, no, we're going to move you now because we're going to change the deal.
Again,
and we're going to move you somewhere else. And I think the plan was they were moving them, and please don't, I don't remember the exact location because this is such a muddy history, but pretty sure that was where they were then moving them to what is the modern day Crow Reservation in Montana.
Now, I had thought that the Crows were supposed to keep their reservations and that they were going to actually give them some more land. They weren't going to move them onto the Crow Reservation, but what touched off this particular confrontation is that many of the other tribes were encroaching on the Crow land.
See,
so the Crows, in this particular battle, it took place on the Crow Reservation in Montana, and those other tribes were not actually supposed to be there. The Crows did not want them there.
This is the difficulty with this whole thing: is there's so much back and forth.
Well, and it's tough to keep track of the tribes, and the other thing to remember too about the tribes is that they were, a lot of them hated each other, and so that's one of the reasons that in the end they wound up losing everything, because if they had actually banded together, they might have stood more of a chance.
Well, and that was what some of the great leaders of the Indian nations were trying to do, was band them together.
But some of these tribes had hatreds going back a long, long way.
They were just, big family feuds, basically.
Yeah, well,
it's not unusual. I mean, it's what people do everywhere. I mean, there's people that have similar hatreds back in Europe and other places too. It's not unusual. But,
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So they're going to get moved. So
Yeah.
the idea is that these people in South Dakota, is at least as I understand it, the plan is to push them up into Montana. And a lot of the tribes would resist that. Not all of them, but a lot of tribes would. So some would go, and some would say no, and they would run away, and they would disappear into this untamed land because, it's not as if it's a metropolitan area.
Yeah.
So they can just take off. And then later on, tribes would then say, we really don't like what you're doing to us, and so we're going to leave the reservations, which is Sitting Bull. He let a huge contingent off of the reservation in protest. So this is kind of the turmoil or the back setting of what's going on at the time in the area.
Yeah, so things were tense between a lot of these tribes in the U.S. Army.
Yeah, they were. I would say it was tense between everybody.
I was going to say tense might be like an understatement.
Yeah. Although the Crows were on our side. They actually helped out. They actually tried to help Custer a bit, but not too much. But,
well, yeah, they didn't
they
go
were
too
allied.
far
They were
for it,
actually
but-
allied with Custer and the gang, but it didn't work out that well.
Yeah,
anyway.
and that's a great segue there, Joe. Let's move to Custer and the Gang, which, by the way, would be a great band name. So if we move away from the native peoples and we move to the U.S. Army or military. Between March and May of 1876, several infantry and cavalry companies were sent, and these were all from different locations. They were sent to patrol along the Yellowstone River heading towards Montana. And they were supposed to look for hostile natives, particularly Sioux.
The ones that were off the reservation.
Right.
Yeah.
And they were supposed to look for him. And Custer himself. Now, Custer would be part of a series of larger contingents of military groups, but Custer had about 600 men underneath him in the 7th Cavalry. And like I said, I mean, those other groups were there, so there's other infantry and cavalry, and there's a lot of different generals whose names I could list off, and you might or might not know them. There's a whole bunch of other companies within each unit, which is hard to keep straight because they use alpha. It's not alphanumeric. It's alpha characters to order them.
Yeah,
So
A, B, C, D, F,
yeah,
G. Yeah.
and so you could have Company E 7 times between all of these groups. So it gets confusing.
And it's actually not so important to the
It's
story.
not so important to
important,
history.
yeah.
So the point
Although-
is, it's a large group. I mean, we're talking 1,500 military, U.S. military. I'm ballparking this.
But not present there that day, though.
No,
Not
this is
nearly that
between
much.
all of the divisions that
Yeah.
were all moving along the Yellowstone River at once.
Yeah, but the ones that were at the Little Bighorn was like what, more like 600-700?
With Custer, it would have been 600.
600. Okay, yeah.
Okay, so 8 days prior to the Battle of the Little Bighorn, another incident took place, and that was the Battle of the Rosebud. And this was on the Rosebud Creek, as I understand it. And
The Rosebud was a little sleigh that belonged to a very rich guy.
wrong story, Joe.
Oh, really?
I was going to say Rosebud is the code used for infinite money.
Yeah,
Oh,
no,
is it?
wrong one
No.
there too.
It is.
Oh, okay.
This is a little creek, which, by the way, I looked for Rosebud Creek, and I can't find it anymore, so I'm pretty sure it's been renamed.
Or it doesn't exist anymore.
Well, it may have dried up,
It
or
could've,
been diverted, or filled in. Who knows? But what happens is the Battle of Rosebud is that several cavalry and infantry companies encounter a unexpectedly large congregation of American Indians, and those U.S. forces are pushed back and basically have to retreat. I mean, they were defeated, essentially. And then what happens is they encounter days later these divisions that had been sent up the Yellowstone River, including Custer's 7th.
And that was a very large group of Indians.
Yes.
Yeah, extremely large.
Yes. We might as well give that away now. Is the initial numbers, everybody thought that what they were going to encounter was going to be somewhere in the low hundreds, maybe the like 500-ish. what it turned out to be was about 1,500 to 2,500 warriors, as I understand it. Okay, so that's a huge scale.
It's a lot.
That's a lot. And when you combine that with the fact that at least a couple of hundred of them, I believe, were armed with repeating rifles, and the cavalry had single-shot Springfield trapdoor rifles.
Yeah, that's the thing that it's one of those things in history that you look back and you go, what the hell was going on? Because somebody got a good contract and the military started getting their guns from them, and so all of these repeating weapons were then turned around and sold to the American Indians.
Yeah.
It's like, wait, why did you think single shot was so much better than a repeating? It doesn't make any sense.
A lot of them, some of them, the ones that were getting sold to the Indians were these lever-action Henry rifles that were chambered in things like 44 and 45 caliber.
Okay.
They were essentially pistol calibers, and so not great long-range weapons.
Okay.
And so the Springfield had a longer, it was in a much more yeehaw cartridge, had much better range. But at the same time, for a close-in engagement like this, I would much rather have
something that you shoot
lever-action
rapidly.
Henry, rather than a single shot. Hell
and that's what I mean. That's like.
And also, by the way, there's another factor in this battle is that Custer actually was moving fast and light, and left his supply train behind. They were still trying to catch up. They had all the ammunition. I shouldn't say all. I mean, his men all had some on them.
And we'll get into some of that. Yeah. So here's what happens is, I know we've jumped ahead a little bit, but the simplified version of this is that Custer and the 7th Cavalry, they move up Rosebud Creek, and they're looking for this contingent of Native Americans. They find them, but as we've said, Custer is fed wrong information. He's told when he gets there that, at the best, there's 800 warriors. Again, we're saying it turns out it's more like 1,500, 2,500.
Probably,
And plus, they're better armed than you are.
Well, they didn't quite. It doesn't appear he knew that, at least from my reading.
Yeah, a lot of people have criticized Custer's behavior, but I think he did just get some bad intel.
I think he did. The other problem is that he was then given, he thought, listen, okay, here's what the plan was. Custer had separated from all these other groups of U.S. soldiers because the plan was they were all going to circle around what is now called the Crow's Nest. That's where the battle took place. And the idea is they were going to hit them from multiple sides on the same day. Basically just swarm in and surround the enemy and decimate them. And he was like, there's a bunch of them and we could probably take them out, but that's no big deal. We'll just hang out. Except then he's given information. Oh, wait, it turns out that there are Indian scouts following our trail to where we are, meaning...
preparing for battle.
Meaning, crap, we're going to get attacked on both sides.
Or he just decided he needed to attack before they got word back that he was there.
Problem was...
and so he'd lose the element of surprise, so he decided to rush his schedule just a little bit.
Problem, of course, in hindsight,
they weren't spies.
They weren't spies. It turns out what they said was scouts was actually people who were leaving the congregation that he was watching, and they were just happened to cross the path that they had walked, and they were leaving. So it's, again, another instance of Custer getting bad information. So I believe that we can just now call this the Custer cluster. Because there's just so much not right with what he's doing.
Or the Custer... you can call it that too.
So let's just simplify this and shorten this up as much as we can. So Custer says, okay, they're gonna get us. We need to attack, and he takes his group of 600 men and he splits them into 3 units, 200 apiece, and they split off in multiple directions. And Custer's group goes in. They eventually, we don't, by the way, know exactly what happened. People have been arguing over this for years.
That's another mystery, is nobody really does know what happened at that particular battle. And there's a lot of conflicting information. But it's a great mystery. Yeah.
So Custer and his men, they head through, they head north, they encounter this much larger enemy contingent than they expect. They're pushed farther north, and the enemy would then go ahead and surround Custer and that group of 200 men that he brought with him, and they would massacre all of them. Every single man would be killed.
Yeah, what's called Custer's Last Stand.
Yeah, and that's why it's called Custer's Last Stand. Exactly. So in the group, this is pretty impressive. Is everybody that died besides Custer is we have his two brothers would be killed, his nephew would die, his brother-in-law would die, almost every horse that was involved would be killed, all of Custer's dogs would be killed.
The
Oh,
Indians
and by
killed
the
his
way, the other
dogs?
196 men would die as well.
I can't believe those jerks killed his dogs. That's rude.
Actually, it's a little surprising they killed the horses.
Well, actually, I think a lot of those guys killed their own horses so they could use them for cover.
They did. They made
Yeah.
barricades. When there's
the
a lot
Indians
of
probably would have kept the
when
horses.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of lead
Yeah.
flying around.
It's
Yeah.
just easy for the horse to get taken out. Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's kind of the way that the whole story goes. And people say, well, why didn't he get help? Because of course Custer sent for help.
Well,
he sent multiple dispatches. But what
he did.
happens is that people have to go many, many miles back, and if they go to the
If they
other,
make it.
yeah, and then there's the other groups that they're trying to get information to. Those other groups were at least 65 miles away. This is rugged terrain. As Joe said before, he left his supply chain behind, so that's dozens of miles back. Like, it takes a long time. It's not like today where you just hop in your car and zip down there in 2 minutes and zip back.
Well, there was
So-
there was a big controversy too that because he split up, as you said, into three groups.
Yeah.
The other two groups under majors, Reno and Benteen, went off in different directions. And one of the controversies surrounding that is why didn't those guys come to his aid? And there are actually a lot of people accused them of cowardice and of not,
And see, I disagree with that because I think
Well, no,
this
they were-
happened so
they had
fast
to-
and they were so far away.
Then those other guys had their hands full. I mean, they
Yeah.
were under attack too. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, a lot of people said that. No.
Well, yeah, it wasn't like they were
Again-
just tooling down the road. Nah,
They hear all the
later.
gunshots and screaming from over there on the hill. They're just like, he's got it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I've led you a little astray, dear listener, as I like to do. There, other than Mr. Finkel or any of the other 120 people who have claimed to be survivors, there is one confirmed survivor of this whole thing,
There
and
was.
that is Comanche.
Yeah, the horse.
The horse, yes.
Yeah.
Comanche was a horse that was ridden by one of the guys in the group, and the horse was found wounded days later and nursed back to health. Comanche would live for another 15 years, and he would die at the ripe old age of 29.
That's pretty good.
That is for a horse. Very good. And by the way, this horse was given a full military funeral. He's one of 3 horses that have gotten a full military funeral. Unfortunately, those sadists did not bury Comanche. Instead, they stuffed him.
Yeah,
And
that's
he
rude.
is... Yeah, I think it is. But he is now in the University of Kansas's National History Museum. So,
Well, I got to remember that if I'm back there in Kansas sometime.
poor Comanche.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't care. I was going to say it's to survive something like this. It's more than a matter of just playing dead. Because I mean, usually what happened after a battle like this, as it makes sense, the women would go through the battlefield with these big war clubs and just cave everybody's head in. Mm-hmm. So you couldn't just like play possum and
No.
hope to survive that way.
No,
because,
there
yeah.
was I don't want to say this, and I don't want to come out derogatory, and I can't remember the exact pronunciation, but I believe it's where they would they were taking scalps.
Yeah.
So that was something that happened, as far as I understand it, especially in this, specifically in this instance. So that you can't fake. You can't just lay there
You can't
and
play
take
possum
it.
when they're peeling your scalp off.
No,
that wouldn't work.
But let's get back into the main line here. So we've got the original event, and then several days later, after the battle, which by the way was a resounding success and victory for the Native Americans.
Yep.
The U.S. forces would return to the area, and they would try to find everybody who'd been killed and figure out what the hell had happened.
I think this is before dog tags were invented.
I'm pretty sure
that
it
would have
was.
been handy to have some dog tags.
As Joe said, some very horrible things were done to the bodies after they were killed, and then they were left to sit in the hot summer sun for at least a day or 2.
I thought it was more like 3 days, but yeah,
It depends, but
yeah.
I mean, that makes it extremely hard to identify a body when all of that has been done to it, and then it's been roasting for a couple
Well,
of days.
and scavengers.
Yeah, exactly. So what happens is these guys show up, they try to identify anybody that they can, they quickly dig graves and they shove the bodies in there, and then they get out of there because they presume that the forces that have done this are still in the area and they don't want to be found out and they don't want to suffer the same fate. So they do their job as quickly as they can, and then they vamoose.
Actually, it's pretty brave of them to stick around as long as they did.
Agree.
Yeah.
So that whole thing, as we've said before, that was June of 1876. We're now going to jump forward. We're going to jump forward to 1920, which is 44 years later. We're going to go to Dayton, Washington.
Hey,
which
just
is
north of here.
Yeah, Pacific Northwest.
Oh.
A local and rather successful farmer named Frank Finkel in 1920 announced that he had in fact been at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and he was in that group that Custer commanded, and he had actually managed to make it out alive. Now, his reasons for bringing the story forward at that time, well, it varies from source to source. Some say that he was having drinks he was drinking beer and playing horseshoes, and somebody started talking bad about Custer, and he came forward to defend him, and that's how his story came out. There are another version that says that he was at a presentation about Custer and the Battle of the Little Bighorn where wrong details were presented, and he then came forward to correct those details. I don't know we don't know which it is.
Yeah.
But from there, Frank would then get a whole bunch of attention, as you would probably expect.
Yeah.
And he'd be interviewed by newspapers, and he would start to share his story at different talks around the area. That was in 1920 that he came forward.
And that's it. And just to put it in perspective, there were still a lot of people alive in 1920 who remembered the battle.
Oh,
they
yeah.
weren't necessarily
it's
there.
44
but
years old.
Yeah, it's not that long ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that long ago. It's I'm trying to think of what was the one that we had in South America in the 80s with Nicaragua? No. What's the guy whose wife collected all the shoes?
Oh yeah, you're talking about the Philippines.
Panama.
The Philippines. No, that was what's your name?
Mark. Anyway.
Yeah, Marcos.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that's the same thing. Is
Marcos.
That was about 40 years ago.
Actually, D.B. Cooper was like 47 years ago.
Yeah. So again, not that
yeah.
long ago in the popular memory.
No.
So totally. As I said, though, he came forward in 1920 with the story. In 1921, his wife Delia would pass away. He would then remarry a woman named Hermie. She then obviously is referred to everywhere as Hermie Finkel. They got married in 1926, and then Frank himself would die in 1930. So 10 years after he came forward. So he died at the age of 76, which means he came forward at the age of 66.
So he would have been in his 20s.
Yeah,
So
he would have been.
the age at least works.
Yeah,
Okay.
The math, generally speaking,
At
works.
least that.
Yes.
That's a start.
Yes, it's not as if he was a 20-year-old dude saying I was there, and you're like, no, you weren't, dummy.
Or, he was age 17
Or he was age 6.
14, yeah.
Right, yeah. So the math, generally speaking, should work.
Okay.
There are multiple stories out there about Frank's origin story, and part of that seems to maybe be because of his second wife, Hermie. Because after he died, she remarried. She married a man and then moved to Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Oshkosh, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
I knew that was going to happen. And they were not well off in terms of money, and she needed extra money, so she filed for a veteran's widow pension. And she kept pushing on it for many years. So
Yeah, they didn't buy the story.
no,
Believe it or
they
not.
never gave her a dime. She died in 1951, I think
Wow.
it was. So she worked on this for a long time.
Was
Which
she
means-
much younger then?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. She was much younger than he was. It appears that maybe she was attracted to him for his fame of his story.
Okay.
Because at that point, he would have been a 70-year-old man. marrying a maybe 30-something-year-old
Yeah.
lady,
Yeah,
or maybe
maybe
20-something.
40.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
no.
it's so you can see
Yeah.
it's maybe not a true loving relationship in that regard, a
Yeah.
romantic relationship. That's the way to put it.
Yeah.
So there are several versions of Frank Finkel's story out there, though, his origin story. And here are the main three that you'll come across in the reading. Version 1, Frank was born in Ohio to German immigrant parents, and his parents spelled their last name Finckle, so Finkel or Finkel?
Probably still Finkel, just
Maybe. But they appear to have dropped the C later on while he was still a boy, and then they changed to Finkel, as you'll see in a lot of places, Finkle. He would grow up to be fluent in both English and German because he lived with German parents. And then when he became a young adult, he moved away from home to find his way in the world. In Chicago in 1872, on hard times, he enlisted in the U.S. Army as a way to earn a living. He knew that German soldiers were coveted by the U.S. Army, and so he changed his name on his paperwork to August Finkel, Finkle. He would say he was from Berlin, Prussia, and he would tell them that his occupation was a clerk.
Why would he do that?
From Prussia?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a weird thing that I didn't get for a long time, but it turns out that the Prussian Wars had been going on for a while, and German soldiers were coveted because that meant that they had been in battle, so they wouldn't freeze up.
Okay.
Whereas a lot of the Americans who would enlist, the first time gunpowder would go off, they'd pee their pants and freeze up.
Well, understandably.
Yeah, and the
yeah,
Prussians,
I'm not discrediting you for that, but
But yeah.
the Prussians were actually pretty formidable soldiers. too.
yeah,
they
they
were.
had a lot of grit, and
Yeah.
that was something you would want to bring on board to make
Gotcha.
your army that much stronger.
Okay.
That's version 1. So then he says, I'm a clerk. He would then eventually rise through the ranks of the Custer's 7th Cavalry. And so that's how he would be then in the place that he said he was at
Okay.
the time he said he was. Version number 2 is that Frank Finkel was born in Germany under his given name at birth of August Finkel, Finkle. He then emigrated to the U.S. and enlisted in the U.S. Army in the early 1870s. But it turns out he wasn't that great of a soldier, and he wasn't very well liked by the guys that he was enlisted with because his accent was so thick and his grammar was so bad that most people couldn't understand him, including the native German speakers
See,
that he would encounter.
And this is why this particular version I don't buy it, because I could just imagine at that gathering in 1920 when he suddenly says, Jawohl, I was a sabbatical of a little big horn. How many people are going to buy that, right?
I don't even know what you just said.
He said, yeah, I was a survivor of the Little Bighorn.
Oh, see?
That was with the German accent.
See, I believed it, though, because I didn't understand it.
So I actually a little bit can't, I know we're not really like debating this yet, but I can a little bit buy that his accent might have been super, super thick if he was trying to convince people that he was August Finkel,
From
born
Germany,
from
Prussian,
Germany, right?
yeah.
So he was faking the accent as the American, not maybe so fluent in German, or his German accent was really bad, and so the native German speakers were like, dude, what?
You suck.
I can't understand this guy. He's
You
not
make-
speaking German. What are you doing? He's just like speaking garbledy-goop at
Yeah,
them.
yeah,
I don't know.
Garbledy-goop,
Yeah.
that's the best description yet.
I can kind of buy that.
Okay, so version 3 is basically the same as version 1, except instead of enlisting under the name of August, he instead enlists under the name Frank Hall. And that whole story comes out from Hermie because that is the story that she stuck to the entire time that she was working to get the pension.
I kind of like Frank Hall better because it's easier to spell. So I'm gonna,
I mean, it makes sense that, she would have used the name that he told her he was registered under.
yeah.
Yeah, if that's what he told her.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is the hard part because I don't know what he said and what she said and what people have implied and shoehorned into the